Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Oh yeah, I thought I heard my name, and there it is. Hello, how you doing? Nice to have you here. Nice to be here. Here being the 16th of May, just about a little less than 6 weeks from the first presidential debate. Whoa, that was a fast-moving change of events. Interesting stuff. I'll get to that at some point, but I have other things I want to talk about first. I have to say that one of you, Chris, and I thank her, suggested that I watch a documentary on Netflix called Rather, about Dan Rather. And since I am a big fan of his, I decided to watch. And wow, I really want to recommend that to you. It's about an hour and a half, extremely well done. And I think what I appreciated most about it was a tour through our common history, assuming you're an old goat like me. So, yeah, I just found myself sort of reliving my entire life watching it. And because I too had something in common with Dan Rather, he talks about how from the earliest times in his life, he had thought of being a reporter because of living in a house that was scattered always with newspapers and seeing how much his parents valued the news and spoke of it. And that was absolutely the same for me. But the things that he was like, I think somebody suggested he was like a Zelig like figure. Zelig, the Woody Allen movie, in which this character ends up at all of these sort of seminal historical events. And Dan Rather actually lived that. Um, it's just amazing, and he, I think, in terms of the history that it reminds you of, it shows you how when television was in its infancy and television news in its infancy, it was an extraordinarily powerful tool. And I think Dan Rather says in it, or somebody says, that the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s would not probably have spread so quickly, taken hold as it did, without the television coverage of what was happening in America's South to Black people. And I know, again, that was something that for a young me, watching CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, looking at dogs being set on women and old men and the brutality. And and these were peaceful protesters. I was stunned. So TV, and he was very much a part of this coverage. So a young Dan Rather in CBS News, is responsible for me being awakened to a reality of my country that had been covered up, shall we say, that I had not really been taught. But there it was in real time. Horror. I was astonished, and I think forever changed. And then he, of course, is in Dallas when JFK is assassinated. And television there too. It was a different time. There were only those 3 broadcast networks, and television helped unify the country. Television news helped unify the country in a moment of national grief. So seeing TV news as this unifying force, being reminded that that is what it had been, until, frankly, Republicans started taking pot shots at it because they thought it was too liberal. Dan Rather says very clearly it wasn't liberal. The job of a reporter was to be a witness. Just show people what's happening and get out of the way. It's fascinating. He was in Vietnam. He was in Afghanistan. He was, oh my God, he was on the floor of the Democratic Convention in 1968 and was sucker punched on live television by a overzealous security person, and still kept his cool. It was amazing. So I recommend it highly. Not only to reacquaint yourself with this one incredible man's career, but to be reminded of where we've all been and the changes that we have lived through, not always for the better. His daughter is interviewed in it, and she says, my dad, what you got to understand, first of all, he's 4th generation Texan. I mean, he is Texas. Now, as I think of Texas now, I hardly think of a humane, bright, liberal like Dan Rather, but he's a Texan. Mm-hmm. And she says of him, he's old school and patriotic to the bone. And that's true too. When people yearn for the way things used to be, and we all have that tendency, we cherry pick what we remember. But this documentary really is a wonderful, wonderful help in retracing our steps and reminding ourselves of, unfortunately, how we got to where we are. Yeah. Again, this other thing about, as a journalist, he just saw his job as being a public servant. He saw there was this ethos in the early days of television news, Edward R. Murrow and Cronkite, of sort of the responsibility of holding this public trust. I know that individual journalists still feel that, but they're living in an environment, a corporatized environment that has lost touch with that mission and is now just chasing the money, the clicks, the views, I think. But I recommend it. Netflix, rather, 'tis called. And speaking of Netflix, oh my God, just saying, Christmas Day, the poor Steelers get to be slaughtered for Christmas Day. What a nice gift from the NFL. They get to be slaughtered on live television by the reigning champion Kansas City. They do. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. This is as ugly, and it is. I heard people wailing about what a horrible schedule, and then I actually looked at it. It's incredible. It's like it's like the NFL has it out for the poor Steelers, and they're in a rebuilding mode. God help them. Jesus H. Yeah. Thank you. Merry Christmas. We get to face Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Merry Christmas. And apparently, I hadn't noted this. The Steelers have rarely been able to be home with their families at Christmas because they're always being scheduled for Christmas. Apparently, um, I guess this will be the third time in 9 years that the Steelers have been scheduled on Christmas Day. They've also been scheduled on Christmas Eve. They've been scheduled on the day after Christmas. I mean, Christmas is Steeler football. But I mean, one of the reasons being that at least the Steelers used to be one of those teams that people really wanted to watch. So it's again clickbait to have them. Not so much anymore, which is why I'm sort of surprised they're still being used in this way and offered up as sacrificial lambs. I can't even begin to imagine. But I mean, they three of their first four games are away. There's what has been called a brutal 8-game stretch that ends the season. Oh my God, God help them. And who knows, maybe they'll surprise us. Excuse me. You never know. But man, Merry Christmas. One story that I have not spoken of, but which just stunned me when I did first see it myself was Trump having this meeting um, at Mar-a-Lago in which he invited the country's top oil executives and flat out issued I don't know, seems to me it's isn't that called a bribe? He said to him, "You guys give me $1 billion. You got money. You give me $1 billion. Get me back to the White House, and I will give you that million back by torching all of the regulations that you hate, uh, decreasing your taxes, and you will end up being richer because you gave me that $1 billion to get me to the White House." This no one is saying it didn't happen. In fact, the Democrats in Congress are screaming for a investigation of it. It's really. I mean, when I read it, I thought this is just flat out in the open, and he always is out in the open. You give me $1 billion, I'm going to do this for you. Quid pro quo. Ain't that the way it works? This guy couldn't do anything above board or legally if his life depended on it. It's just not something that he knows. It's something that's alien to his very being. Robert Reich was saying that you watch the trial and you see that the people who inhabit this world of Trump inhabit a world where there are really no norms, no standards of decency, whatever the hell that is, they don't know, and no sense of a common good. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know. We've seen this guy now. God. All he and the people around him see is life is totally transactional, is only about making money off of others and making sure others don't make money off of you. It's a place where there are no friendships, no relationships, no there's only transactions. And they're not the kind of transactions that I remember my father always saying was the only way you should think about a transaction is both people going away happy. Ha! That's not Trump world. No. One person's got to go away humiliated, beaten, and screwed, and the other, him, goes away triumphant. And Reich points out that he worries that being subjected to this steady stream of Trump world, the lies, the vindictiveness, the bullying tactics, the intimidation, all of this, that whether we realize it or not, and I think we do realize it, it has had a truly corrosive effect on us, on our country, on the world, on even our relationships with each other. No one in their right mind would tell their children to look at the president, model yourself after the president. No one in their right mind. And Reich says, we need to remind ourselves, and this is to keep ourselves from despair, we need to remind ourselves that most of the people we know do not operate like this. And I can say that. They do not operate like this. I know some people who do, who come sort of, who none like this, but yeah, I know some people who play fast and loose and whose, sort of moral map does not completely agree with mine. But we have to remember that most of the people we know do have some sense of decency, of honor, of integrity. That people have actual relationships, not transactions. Oh my. So I was upset to see a fact that this was in Media Matters, that the news that Trump had this meeting with the oil billionaires and suggested the quid pro, give me $1 billion, I'll give you everything you want. I will accelerate global warming for you. I will throw humanity and the earth under a bus. But first, you got to give me $1 billion so I have the power to do it. If you get your news from TV news, you never heard that story. I was stunned to see that. With the exception of MSNBC, no other television outlet, national television outlet, even told its audience that this potentially illegal offer and attempted deal had happened at Mar-a-Lago. It was reported initially in the Washington Post. MSNBC is the only people who picked it up and put it out there. It's where I heard it. Nobody else did. Can you imagine? And this is how now I think corrupted our national news, television news media is. How different it is from the days of Dan Rather. That they did not see fit to include in their news coverage that the Republican nominee for president told oil executives that if they gave him $1 billion, he would get rid of all the regulations that the Biden administration has enacted to combat climate change, and he would sweeten their tax regulations as well. That was not recognized as a piece of important news for people to know is mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing. Also mind-blowing to me, I'm all over the place today, excuse me, was the portrait of King Charles. I still have trouble calling him king. He'll always be a prince to me. The portrait of King Charles, good God in heaven. First of all, I want to say this. The guy who did the portrait obviously can do a regular portrait because he pretty much gets Charles in a very complimentary way. gets Charles' head. Uh, but this bloodbath he puts him in is is just what? Now, I read a scathing review of it. I can't remember who. I think it was the Washington Post uh, art critic who just says, I mean, this is the definition of bad portraiture. It's that this artist is just throwing everything. Look, I can do realism. Look at that head. Look, then I'm going to be abstract. I can throw flowers, and I got a little butterfly here. That's symbolic. It is so awful. So if he wanted to do that, and other people have pointed this out, why would you make red the color? And people who don't like the English monarchy would say it's perfect. Ray, if you're listening, it's perfect because their hands are bloody. Although his hands are not. His hands and his head have no blood. Um, it's unbelievable. Excuse me. Anyway, the other little note I found about it, which tickled me, was, I don't know who pays for this kind of thing. And then I saw who did, and it was a philanthropy that commissioned it, and this is a philanthropy that used to be back in the day, and I mean back in the day, like the 1400s, the 1500s, was a guild. And wait till you hear the name of the guild. I love it. It'd make a great name for a rock band. Listen to who commissioned this hideous portrait. The Worshipful Company of Drapers. Now, I'm thinking when I saw drapers, I thought, are those people who like made curtains? What's a draper? I, but they're worshipful. I love it. The Worshipful Company of Drapers are responsible for the bloodied work of that particular artist. Good God. Um, I I want to say about the debate. I was shocked. I mean, the news of it happened, yesterday as the show began, and I was shocked at how quickly, Trump agreed to the debate, and then how, you know, unbelievably quickly, two networks are immediately chosen and dates set. I mean, all that happened in a couple of hours. And here's what that makes me think. I'm not sure it'll ever happen. I mean, I can see Trump. I mean, Trump always says, he lies all the time. So if he said, yeah, I'll be there, I'm not so sure he will. My bet is that he'll find something to get in a snit about, something he'll say is not fair, and he won't show. But on the other hand, I had been thinking that before, the dates were set, the moderators chosen, it will be harder and harder for him, I would think, to not show. And maybe he is itching for this, even without a studio audience, because he really thinks that he can best Joe Biden. Now, this only works if the moderators don't let it get out of hand. And as we know, handling Trump is an impossible job. But having access to his microphone is really all that is necessary. So you don't have to have, Mr. Trump, please, Mr. Trump, please, let Mr. Biden speak. No, you've had your time. No. Just cut the mic. And we know that is doable. And we know that I think the agreement is, that is what will be in effect for both. Biden can't interrupt Trump, Trump can't interrupt Biden. Mute them. CNN has the first debate coming up on what was it, the 19th, the 20-something? I'm sorry, I can't remember. Numbers never stick in my head. But they have chosen Jake Tapper and Dana Bash as the moderators. Now, yeah, okay. I think both are capable. ABC gets the next shot in September, and I thought I saw somewhere that they have put their main anchor, Muir, in as moderator, along with a woman whose name I don't recognize, and I don't know. Maybe I have not a clue because I don't watch their news. And I know a lot of people are freaked out because they thought they don't see Muir as somebody who can handle Trump. And they also don't see, and what they wanted was George Stephanopoulos. But I don't think you could have Stephanopoulos because he's too clearly up, he has his, I even think he's got a book out now, right? That's very anti-Trump. You can't have that, I think, and be seen as a legitimate moderator. Bree says he begs to disagree with me that Trump will definitely debate because he wants to talk and talk and talk. And it gives him credibility, and he just needs style over substance. And TV, well, they love the entertainment. Bree says that's why Jimmy Kimmel starts every show with Trump. Media can't help itself, says Bree. Well, they won't. They could, but they don't. Because, yes, they love a train wreck because it collects eyeballs. I was reminded of that when, I had my little fender bender on my vacation. And, the tow truck driver called and said, I'm behind you, but I'm stuck in traffic. I can't get to you. And I said, well, what's causing the traffic? And she said, you are. And I remember thinking, what? I'm off to the side. I'm not blocking the road. But a car off to the side and there was a police car behind me with its lights flashing. That's all it takes to create, because people like wrecks, train wrecks, car wrecks. It doesn't matter. They gotta stop and they got a look. Unbelievable. Now, I admit, you see that, you do sort of wonder what it is. Is it not possible to continue driving at a regular rate of speed while your eyes quickly dart to the right or the left, wherever, the wreck is, to just see, oh, I see it, doesn't look too bad, or whatever? Just saying. Everybody's into multitasking these days. Why can't people rubberneck and keep driving and not cause backups? Jeez. So, what else we got here? So much for the Presidential Debates Commission or whatever that was. Wow. Wow. And there are some that are saying, man, for a strong institutionalist like Joe Biden to, say to the debate commission, hey, screw you guys, move over. You don't know what you're doing. We're going to do this on our own without you and without your stupid rules and your stupid audience and all of that. Now, I have to say, if these debates do occur in a television studio with just the two guys and the moderators and an ability to mute mics, this could work. And not just the ability to mute mics, but the willingness, right, on the part of whoever's put in charge of that button to use it. Roger wants to know, are they going to have the debate at Rikers Island? Well, could be. It is. It is true that by the time they do the debate, yeah, we could have one of the debaters could be a convicted felon. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because I don't think that's a slam dunk. In my head, I sort of do, but I don't want to, nix it. Somebody wrote a piece about I think this was in the Atlantic, the 8 things that could shape, or I think they didn't say could, that will shape this election. And I don't know if they're right about everything, but they bring up some interesting stuff. And the first one is the one that scares me the most, because they say the number one thing is well, come on, why won't you let me see this? Subscribe. Jesus. The number one thing is if Biden falls, and I mean physically, that if there's any kind of spectacular either fall, any physical thing that underscores that he's old, that could really put the kibosh on him. Of course, the same thing could happen to Trump. He's not exactly a young man either. But just that being, because once something like that happens, it's forever now. It's in every ad. It's in every, this is the leader you want, face down, being, whatever. And that's of all the things I read, that's the thing that scares me the most, because clearly it's his the way he walks is how his age shows the most. I think in every other way he seems really good. It's the way he walks. He obviously has a very stiff gait. It has changed them. I think he has some neuropathy too. It's just listen, I don't walk right anymore. I got, bone on bone in my one knee. I need a replacement. I got a brace on my other leg. I'm an old person who's constantly fearful of falling, and I'm sure Joe Biden is. And God help us if he falls. Just saying. And then there's this other thing I saw that just made me sigh, because it shows that we don't live in a democracy, in fact, even though we're trying to save it. We don't live in a democracy because we do not choose our president in a democratic way. We have this idiotic thing called the Electoral College. And that means that some Americans' votes don't mean crap. Don't mean a thing. And when you think of all the Democrats who live in red states, and conversely, the Republicans who live in blue states, they can go vote until the cows come home, but their vote doesn't count. The popular vote doesn't count. It's where the vote is geographically. Now, the fact that we are in a swing state, our votes probably count. Yeah, more. But if you're in a red state or a blue state, give it up. Don't even vote for whoever you want. It doesn't matter. How's that democratic? And so I saw it broken down, and we've seen this before because it is what we saw the last time these two ran. The November presidential election will likely be decided by about 6% of American voters. 6% of American voters living in 6 states. That is the most depressing, maddening statement I have seen, even though I know it, but just seeing it that starkly. The election will likely be decided by 6% of voters in 6 states. And that's something that is agreed upon by strategists on either side. Yep. And that's why these presidential candidates don't even bother going to states where it doesn't matter. It's why Hillary Clinton's unbelievable failure to go to Wisconsin is mind-blowing. So, looking at the 6 states in question and I'm sure you know them, but I'll tick them off here. They be Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. No, and Wisconsin. I said Michigan. And Wisconsin, right? That's it. Now, we luckily live in one of them. But God, if you don't, you live in New York, you live in Texas, you live in, it doesn't matter. That's not democracy. And last time around, 2020, Biden's winning margin in those states was a little over 300,000 people. 158 million and change Americans voted. 158 million, but 300,000 in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Nevada decided that Joe Biden was the president. It's uh, it's sobering stuff, I'm so mad at the founding fathers. Damn, jeez. I understand that they were appeasing certain recalcitrant folks, and they were engaging in something we don't even know what it means anymore: compromise. And so you get a document that is not everybody's cup of tea and definitely handicaps Democratic candidates who invariably win the popular vote, and in any other country would be clearly the president. But around these parts, you can lose the popular vote, as many as many Republicans have, over and over again, and you get to go to the White House. You be the winner. It's nuts. Just want to remind myself that screaming about it is not going to change a thing. Uh, Good news in the I mentioned, I think, in passing a few days back or something, the horror of this Louisiana gerrymander, and with two Trump judges actually saying that, sympathetically agreeing with a bunch of white citizens who said they were being discriminated against because a second black district had been mapped out. Uh, and the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court actually said, come on, and did not agree. I'm as we've learned with so many things that are dealing with our justice system, I don't think that's the last word, although you would think if the Supreme Court said something, it would be. But I suspect what they did is just said something like, come on, you got to be kidding, and sent it back. I don't know. All I know is there was a uh, positive thing that happened and that actually involved this Supreme Court. Oh, Milton, you're telling me something. You don't think that'll make any of these fools who think that Biden doesn't know what he's doing with the economy? Milton's telling me the stock market just hit 40K for the first time. Yeah, the economy's going gangbusters, and still every poll, I mean, just stubbornly, every poll says people don't think Biden has done anything to help them or the economy. It drives me insane. And I say this as somebody who wants to say that the stock market is not necessarily an indicator for most people. Most people ain't in it. But it's obviously a sign that those that have think things are going pretty well. Damn. I don't know how we get that through. I'm surprised that Cyril Wecht hasn't had an obit in the New York Times yet, because he's worthy of one, and I'm sure he thought he'd get one, and maybe it's still coming, but man. And I saw a piece that Cyril actually had written about his own life, and he wrote this in like 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And I just want to read a little bit of it because it's so Wechtian. He talks about the fact that he was an only child. And his father always told him, "You will be a doctor." His father was a grocer. He had a mom and pop grocery store. But Cyril says this: "I was an obedient child, so I never questioned that I would be a doctor. And then as I moved through high school and into college, my life just seemed to flow that way. It was inculcated in me, and that was it. I went to Pitt, pre-med, of course, and was very active. I was president of the student body. I was president of my fraternity. I was business manager of the Pitt News and of the Pitt Players. I had the lead role in Our Town and was concertmaster of the orchestra. I was even president of the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, even though I was a Jew." Jeez. Anyway, he's yeah. There'll never be another. There'll never be another. He lucked out. All his kids remained in town. He said he could have packed up and left many times, but the family was so situated here. He says, "I might have become the chief medical examiner in New York, Chicago, LA." And he ends it with, "So that's my life. I have no regrets. I get involved and I open my mouth. That's all I can do." Cyril in his own words. And one other thing before we go, John McWhorter, who I really like, he's a linguist, and he wrote a piece saying, apostrophes that those of us who get, and I'm one of them, get my, panties in a twist when people misplace apostrophes. And I totally agree with McWhorter that I'm just an elitist jerk. And he goes on to say, that we didn't have apostrophes for a long time in the English language. We did fine without them until the 1500s, in fact. Chaucer wouldn't have known one if one bit him in the behind. using an apostrophe to indicate something's missing, like, it's instead of it is. He says, even if that apostrophe were missing, if you say it's in the room, you don't need the apostrophe. We can read it and have understanding of it. Very rarely does an apostrophe really help somebody know something important. There are times when, and he says your and your, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E and Y-O-U-R. And he says, the apostrophe, frankly, is just decorative. No one would seriously think, and he's right about it. And so he says, we can't eliminate it because there are places where not having the apostrophe really makes you say, what? And he points this out. Okay, there are no apostrophes in what I'm about to read to you. Residents refuse to be placed in bins. Now, if there'd been an apostrophe after the S of residents, I would have read that. Residents refuse to be placed in bins. So it goes from, ideas of like people being stuck in garbage bins as opposed to sometimes, But then he goes on to say this, and I think he's right. I think the visceral sentiment in this apostrophe thing is actually a kind of classism. And he says, and it's one from which I cannot honestly exempt myself. When we no longer talk, at least overtly, of people marrying beneath themselves, when the difference in dress style between the rich and the poor is much less stark than it was in the past, it just doesn't make sense that blackboard grammar rules should retain one of the last permissible ways to look down on other people. This idea that this sense of superiority that people have who know where the apostrophe goes, he says, is just bull. You should resist any sense that people who never quite master its, it apostrophe s, or your, are not the sharpest knives in the drawer. The rule, he says, they are having trouble with is one that was never necessary anyway. We aren't going to stop using apostrophes, but it could help to understand that we could, with no harm to anybody. And then I read this, which I just loved. Somebody wrote a letter to the editor and said, an obscure governmental agency in 1890 tried to eliminate the apostrophe. This is in the United States. It was called the U.S. Board on Geographic Names, and it banned the use of the apostrophe, the possessive apostrophe, in U.S. place names. And that held, although there have been 5 exceptions made. And the one that I'm aware of is Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard has an apostrophe, but it is one of only 4. And Pikes Peak, that used to have an apostrophe, but it hasn't in over 100 years. Pikes Peak lost its apostrophe. Harper's Ferry lost its apostrophe. Tom's River, and we could go on and on and on and on and on. But somehow, Martha's Vineyard did not. And I'll give you the other 4 that didn't. Not that I know any of these places. Yikes Point, John E's Pond, Jesus, Carlos Elmer's Joshua View, and Clark's Mountain. Those are the 5 that kept their apostrophes. Just saying. I'm sorry about my voice, and I'll cease and desist and get lost. But thank you very much for being there with me, and I'll be back on Monday, and God knows what'll happen between now and then. And now I got to go see how poor Cohen is doing under cross examination. Okay, you have a good one.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.